All right, good evening, everyone. My name is D.Moss, and you are now tuned into One on One with D.Moss. And tonight we're going to have a great conversation. We talk about the black community and law enforcement on a regular basis, whether we're in our living rooms, our kitchens, beauty salons, barbershops, it doesn't matter. It's a very common conversation. But today we're going to talk about it from a different perspective. We're not talking about protest. We're not talking about going after officers and mayors and all that wonderful stuff. Today we're talking about how we can become a part of the system and change the system from within. We need, I think most of us recognize and acknowledge the fact that we need more black law enforcement officers. We typically deal with issues with white police officers coming into predominantly black or brown communities. And there's not enough representation, people who speak our language, who understand our hand gestures or our culture. The downside is a lot of officers talk about the fact when they go in to recruit more black recruits for the law enforcement, we typically get the not interested. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk with two gentlemen who have been actively involved in the process of recruiting more black individuals into law enforcement. And we're going to see what they have to say, because I think this is where our conversation needs to go. We can protest all day, but if we're not going to do something about the actual problem and attempt to change it and be actively involved, it's cool to come out twice a year for a protest. But I tell you, it takes a whole lot more courage to go through the academy, put that badge on, and do the job that has to get done. So with that being said, we're going to introduce our guests. I'm going to start with former State Trooper Lindsey Brown. Rob, I'll move you to the bottom. All right, Lindsey, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Lindsey Brown, retired Connecticut State Police.
All right. Mr. Pierce, I'm not sure if you were local. I'm thinking you State Trooper, correct? Mr. Pierce?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yes, that's correct. I worked with Lindsey for about 17 years. I'm also retired Connecticut State Police, and I spent a good number of years in the recruitment and selection unit of the Connecticut State Police, heavily involved in recruiting.
Okay. And then we have Rob Jones.
I'm just that boy. But seriously, I worked with Lindsey in his Explorer post, and I don't know if he brags enough about it, but I would say that his post was probably had the most state troopers or state trooper candidates than any other post in Connecticut.
You're jumping into something. Let's get into that, but let's we're just doing the introductions, but we'll let Lindsey talk about the program. Is that cool?
You got it.
All right. So we had a clip. Two clips I want to play. One, make sure I get the right one. Did it upload? Wait a second. Where is it? Here we go. Two clips we want to play. Here's the first one.
Yeah, so you leave the Marines. What made you think law enforcement, or even more directly, New Jersey State Police?
I never thought about it. I didn't know what a trooper was until I became one. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, instead of going back to Buffalo home, I went to East Orange. And then I got a job in Patterson, and then I was in Patterson working in a plastic factory called Celanese Corporation. I forget the name of the factory, but that was the national corporation, Celanese. One of my classmates, he came on the job and I was training him. He said, "Man, I ain't doing this crazy stuff for the rest of my life." I said, "Yeah, John, what are you gonna do?" He said, "Man, I'm gonna be a trooper." I said, "Gonna be what?" He said, "I'm gonna be a state trooper." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh man, that's some guys, man, that did, with the boots and the breeches, and all they do is ride up and down the highway giving people tickets and stuff like that." I said, "Man, you mean a cop?" He said, "Yeah, man." I said, "Man, I don't want to be no cop, man." He said, "Man, come on with me. Let's go take the exam." I took the exam in Troy Hills, New Jersey. And apparently I did well. So, I was an ideal candidate, I guess. I didn't know anything about New Jersey politics, that the NAACP had been really campaigning to get a black trooper. I didn't know any of that. And I didn't care about any of that. It was the JOB.
Right.
So, next thing I know, I was in the academy, getting my chops busted again by more DIs. I did okay. Somebody said I was graduated second in my class. George Fusick was
Number one.
Number
What
one.
year was that?
61. 61.
58th class, right?
58 class. We started out with 130 something and ended up with 58. A lot of guys in my class are gone.
Yeah.
They're gone on.
All right, and we are back. So let's talk with Lindsey Brown and Leon Pierce, along with Rob Jones, about. I guess first, let's start with what made you decide to get into law enforcement? What was the decision that you had to make for yourself to say, you know what, this is a commitment I'm going to make? So whoever would like to start, Leon or Lindsey.
Go ahead, Leon.
All right. So when I grew up, I grew up in Hartford. I moved to a suburb called Rocky Hill, maybe outside of 15, 20 minutes outside of Hartford. And then I moved back to Hartford and for my high school years. In each of those 3 different stints of living in those communities, I had interactions with law enforcement, and they were always negative. At Rocky Hill, at a very young age, I remember at the time my mother confronting law enforcement officers about a robbery that had taken place. And clearly my brother and I, we were very young. We just had come from McDonald's. We had some fresh, hot food in our hands. And clearly we could not have been the people that were involved in a robbery. First of all, we were little kids. And, and hear my mother talk about it, the way they described the 2 people that were involved in a robbery, they had the same color windbreakers that we had on. And at that time, windbreakers were a very common thing for people to wear. And so I didn't think much about it until, you get older and you reflect on those things. And then when I moved to Hartford, there were a few motor vehicle stops where, from what I know today, and after talking to police officers in Hartford, I learned about the tactics that people use to try to get on one occasion. I was sitting in my car waiting for, I guess, a ticket because I was speeding. I admitted I was speeding, and the police officers just kept coming up to my window, looking in and moving back real slow. And then they did it a number of times, and I just sat there. But later on, I spoke to another Hartford officer about it, and he said they were trying to get you to run. So. Wow. With that information, I decided I wanted to make a change. So I became a police officer, and I always wanted to investigate allegations of police misconduct and corrupt police officers. I just think that there's no place for corruptness in police departments, and that's why I became a police officer. For my negative experiences.
Nope, that's what's up. Thank you, Lindsey.
My experience was the result of a gentleman by the name of retired State Trooper Keith Price. And I'll always say his name when people ask me that question because I have to give him his props. Because when I was a sophomore in high school, he came into our class. He was in charge of the recruitment unit at that time. He came into our class and gave a presentation. Keith is probably as tall, if not taller, than Rob and Leon. So you can imagine the first time in my life, being a 15, 16-year-old kid, seeing the first black troop I've ever seen walk into a classroom in high school. Immediately, I was in awe. I had already known I was going to join the Marine Corps, but I had no plans of what I was going to do when I got out after my 4 years was up. Once he walked in, and by the time he left, I had already made up my mind. So when I got out the Marine Corps, I came home. I, kept my head clean, did what I had to do into the process. I didn't even know how I was going to get into the process because I didn't know anyone. I didn't know any cops. But another Marine who I worked with at the time, he was also interested in taking a test. So he came into the office one day and said, "Hey, state police is hiring now, and you're going to take the test." I said, "Absolutely." We both ended up becoming state troopers. But that's as simple as it was for me. Just seeing another black state trooper walk into the classroom and talk to us civilized and give me at least another opportunity to pursue something other than where I was living on the north end of Hartford.
Okay. So how difficult was it for you to make that decision in terms of coming back and talking with family members, guys that you grew up with, when you told them, "Look, I'm going to become a state police officer"? What was the response?
The response that I got from my family was my mother was, she was nervous, like most moms are. She was nervous about me joining the Marine Corps, and she was certainly nervous about me becoming a state trooper or a police officer in any fashion. My friends, they respected that. I was never that guy to go out and commit crimes. I got into my share of fights. I hung out with my boys. Got into my share of fights, but I always drew the line because I always set those goals for myself. I always knew that if I got in trouble, I couldn't go to the Marine Corps or I couldn't become a state trooper. So that was always at the forefront of my mindset. Don't do anything stupid enough to get you into jail, because if you do, all of your dreams are shattered. But all of my friends, I had the type of friends who if you were trying to pass me some weed and you didn't know me, they would be like, yo, he don't do that. He don't smoke that, man. Get that away from him.
Okay.
Those are the types of dudes I would run with. But then they would go and hustle. You know what I mean?
So,
but they didn't allow it, of me or from me.
okay, so prior to joining the force, you had a history of making healthy decisions for yourself anyways, and you knew your perimeters.
Right. It started with some goals. It started with goals that I set for myself at a young age.
All right. Leon, could I ask you the same question in terms of what was the response when you told people that you were going to become a state trooper?
So for me, my family, it was just want to worry, being in law enforcement, obviously, knowing what officers face each and every day. It was just constant worry, especially for my grandmother. Not so much for my mother, but my grandmother would always tell me to be careful. My family was very supportive of whatever I did, and to this day, they're still supportive. But it was more or less just a feeling of worry about what happened out there.
All right. So it didn't really come as a surprise. They were just kind of worried.
No, not so much. I kind of, when I went to college, I told them what I wanted to do. So
okay, so there were conversations.
Right.
All right, that's what's up. All right. So in terms of recruitment, let's talk recruitment. So let's fast forward to, say, as tumultuous as 2020 was. Let's go to 2020. You guys are retired troopers. What, looking at everything that transpired last year, what do we do to get more young people, both men and women, involved in law enforcement? Talk about, I guess, some of the methods you used in the past. Talk about what you would suggest or what recommendations you would make to both state and local police departments to, get our young people actively involved in this process.
So for me, and I used to, when I worked in the recruiting unit, I utilized Lindsay a lot. Lindsay was willing to go out there and do it. He really enjoyed the work, and he was an excellent role model for the purposes of trying to recruit other troopers. And so outside of going to recruiting events at colleges and being invited to high schools to talk to the kids in the school, I actually, one of the methods I employed was to walk up to minorities and ask them if they know anything about state troopers. And most of them would say no. And I don't know if Lindsay was ever part of this, but I would actually invite these young men that I befriended and out to dinner, and out to lunch. And at the lunch, we would have 4 or 5 other troopers there, other African-American troopers at the lunch. And I'd introduce them to the troopers, and they'd all talk about what they do, so that this person would have a firsthand experience about what state troopers do. And also they would see other state troopers, just to know that, hey, we are out there, and that you have the opportunity to become one as well. So just random encounters with people that I didn't know, I would walk up to them and introduce myself and ask them about their interest in becoming state troopers.
Can't hear you, D.
Yeah.
All right, same question. Methods, what recommendations would you give? Let's talk about that.
My opportunity came. I always said I use my job to serve my community. I use my job in law enforcement to give back to the youth of my community. I had an opportunity to become a school resource officer in my 3rd year on the job.
Sit on the couch. That couch over there. No.
By one of the sergeants who had asked me where I wanted to go in my career. And we had a brief conversation. I said, eventually I'd like to get to gangs. And he said, well, have you put in for the school resource officer job? I said, no, I haven't. At that time, seniority played a big part in where you moved within the department. So if you didn't have at least 5 years on, you could forget about going into any other unit. So he said, you might want to put in for it. The lieutenant mentioned your name. So I did, and I ended up getting that position. So one of the things we had to do is we had to write a memo and describe a list of the things that we wanted to accomplish and things that we wanted to implement within the school, so that we wouldn't show up there, at least as far as the state police was concerned, looking like the big bad wolf, trying to be intimidating. That wasn't our focus as a department, and it sure wasn't mine. My approach was to come in and build a rapport with the students that were there, and try to get them to like me as best I could, try to get to like them as best I could, and build a rapport with the staff and everybody within the school. And one of the things I thought of was my Explore program, which is near and dear to my heart to this day. That and a mentoring program. So I reached out to the only other Explore program I knew down in Prospect, another retired brother. He's also a Marine, Nelson Abazua. I reached out to him and he said, "Yep, come on down. I'll show you what I'm doing down here in Prospect." And I went down a couple of days later, spent the whole day with him. He gave me the lay of the land. He kind of inspired me to do certain things his way that worked out for me in my program as well. And then I called up to the to headquarters and said, "Hey, I see in our A&O manual, we can set up Explore programs. I want to do in that Troop H. It had never been done before at Troop H." So I said, I went up there. I talked to it was a detective up there. He gave me a box. He gave me a little box, and it had one sample uniform and some badges, some Explore badges. He said, "Hey, here you go." And I'm like, "Okay, so what now?" He said, "Well, now it's on you." I said, "Okay." So I left. I went back to the school where I was working at Prince Tech. I was there from 2000 to 2005 as the SRO. I went back to the school. I sat in my office. I drafted my profile. I drafted my recruitment plan. I drafted every single document that I needed for my program. And I kind of based it. I used state police documents to kind of guide me to create my own documents within state police, within my Explore program. So if I saw something that said state police, I just changed it to Troop H, AI Prince Tech Explorers Post 1395. And then I just kind of finagled the writing within that document to make it fit what we needed for our Explore program. And then I went on a massive recruitment event. I would go to all of the lunch waves, sit down at tables where all the kids that didn't like me were. And I would try to recruit them first. And they didn't, give me too much of a hard time, but you can tell by the vibe that they didn't like cops, right? And a lot of them probably didn't like me personally either. But that was my strategy at first. And then I moved on to all of the other kids, because in our communities, and we're probably going to touch on this in a little bit, but I'm going to jump ahead right now if I can. What I started to notice was a lot of the kids were afraid to even talk to a cop because of the perception. I think we all experienced this because of the perceptions within our own community about cops. Don't be a cop. If you're a cop, you're a snitch. If you're talking to a cop, you're a snitch. Now, I was able to pull out of my program, and when it was all said and done after the 10 years, I was able to pull 4 troopers out of that, 3 Connecticut state troopers and 1 Wisconsin state trooper. A couple local law enforcement officers and a lot of other kids went on to do a lot of things in the private sector as well. But one quick story about recruitment. I went over to my old high school, Weaver High School. And I think I called Leon, as a matter of fact. Leon sent another trooper, Juan Morales, down there to the high school with me. And I brought my, I don't know if you remember this, Leon. I brought one of my other explorers with me. They're both Hispanic. Weaver High School is predominantly black, but a lot of Hispanics go to school there too. I sat in all 3 lunch waves during that school. I signed up 33 kids, but while I'm there, I'm noticing some kids looking. They want to come over and talk to us, but they look like they were afraid to. So I would reach, kind of roundabout them, talk to them on the sly and get their contact information. Signed up 33 kids that day in those 3 lunch waves. I called every household. I sent letters to every household. I set up an open house for specifically for those parents and those kids. They all said they would be there. On the day of the open house, not one showed up.
Wow.
Not one.
Wow.
Now, I always had kids from Prince Tech. I had kids from Weathersfield. One of the Weathersfield kids is down with State Trooper now. He's got 12 years on the job now. I always had kids from other communities, within the Troop H area, but I could never get my old high school, Weaver High School. And I went to Hartford High as well, and I went to Buckley as well. I could never get our black youth to be a part of that program. I had a few along the way, and one became a police officer in Manchester, right? I had a few along the way, but not nearly as many as we need, right? And a lot of that, I believe, is because of the perception. Now, this is before everything that's going on the last couple of years now. We're going back 20 years ago now, because I started this program in 2000, right? So there's more going on now with law enforcement and police brutality than there was back then. At least it's not known as much. It wasn't known as much back then. But I couldn't get those kids. And the principal asked me, he said, hey, what can you do? What can I do to get you here to build your program, your Explore program here? I said, well, you guys have Hartford Police Explorers, don't you? He said, well, we have a school resource officer, but he's not doing an Explore program like yours. I want to get your program in here. I said, well, I'll see what I can do. I went back, and I just couldn't divide my time between Prince Tech being a state school and Weaver being a local school. I just couldn't divide my time. That the department and the rules didn't work that way. But my point is to say this. The biggest challenge from my point of view is the perception. Now, Leon, I know Leon's experienced this too. I think every cop has. You're walking somewhere, you're in a restaurant, you're having lunch, or you're just walking through your community, and you see a kid acting up, and they're with their parent, and a parent looks at them and say, hey, you better be good. I'm going to have you go with him, and he's going to put handcuffs on you and put you in jail. Now, that still irks me, as I just said it right now, because I hate when parents do that to their kids, because what they're doing is they're traumatizing that kid and teach them to distrust the police right away. Absolutely. So I would always talk to the parents, say, hey, listen, if you don't mind, please don't say those kinds of things to your child, because it paints us in a bad light. It makes your child more afraid of us. So when they do need us, they won't come to us to help, because they think they're going to get in trouble if they do. So I'll leave it at that, because I know you got a few other questions you want to get to.
No, it's okay. Oh, go ahead, Rob. You had a question? Rob, you're muted.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to hear Leon's perspective too, because I think it aligns with Lindsay, but I think because Leon's been on the job a lot longer than Lindsay, that he may have a varied perspective, but something that can kind of support what Lindsay was saying.
No, I was just going to add that, Lindsay is one person. You need to have every other person on that department that believes like Lindsay or looks like Lindsay doing the same thing that Lindsay is doing, and, I always go and talk to minority officers as well and say, hey, do you know anyone that wants to be a police officer? And people would apply, or, you'd have very little follow-up, but, to Lindsay's point, there's not a lot of people in the inner cities and the urban areas that just want to be police officers for those reasons that Lindsay stated, and also just because of what they see in the community. It's unfortunate, but it's gonna take more. You're gonna need more than one person that's out there waving the flag for an agency to get the numbers.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. We just had retired Springfield officer Charlie Yeomans, noted around the community. He's like a local legend. Charlie, if you could introduce yourselves, can you hear me? Charlie, can you hear me? I think he's still getting ready.
I can see Charlie. Charlie, can you hear us?
Can you hear us, Charlie? Okay. So until Charlie's ready, we'll get him right on. But I found a couple of clips when they talked about recruitment across the country and how the numbers are down. And it's interesting you said that, Leon, because I agree 100%. Typically, most departments will send one person out and make him responsible to recruit people of color from all across the city. And it's really what we need is it has to be a systemic approach to recruitment and ensuring that there's equity within these systems. So I'm going to play a quick clip, then we'll come back with more comments.
I just need to talk. Half hour, so.
Uh-oh, is it on?
I just need to talk. Can I just talk to you for 1 second?
Michael Brown is a former Maryland police officer who now works for a company that trains law enforcement officials.
Homicide, suicide, how fast it can change.
He is also one of 12 minority officers who filed a lawsuit in 2018 alleging systemic racism within the ranks of Maryland's Prince George County Police Force. A problem, he says, that starts at the top.
It's a learned behavior.
just like a kid. You don't know of racism until somebody teaches it to you. So it's the same thing going to the police department, because a person coming into law enforcement, you don't know how to get away with stuff. Somebody got to teach that to you. And that's the problem right now, because all the leadership.
Attracting more black applicants to the force is one way to fix the system, some policing experts say. But the death of George Floyd and other African Americans at the hands of police has hampered an already problematic hiring process that's decades old. Sergeant Anthony Russell, a former recruitment supervisor and head of a black officers advocacy group in Baltimore County, Maryland, explains.
I remember when I became a police officer, I remember talking to my father, who grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and he said to me very clearly, why would you want to be the police? These were the same people who had fire hoses and had canine dogs, and they used these dogs and these hoses against us. So that's an uphill battle that every municipality is going to deal with as far as recruiting minorities. When you add the George Floyd situation on top of that, it makes it that much more difficult.
The department needs to hire someone that looks like me, that looks like him, that knows the community, and it builds up the kids also in the community to say, I want to be like that police officer, this police officer.
That's Lieutenant Sonia Zollicoffer alongside Lieutenant Thomas Boone. Both are also plaintiffs in the lawsuit against Maryland's Prince George County Police Force alleging racism. Bureau of Justice Statistics data show that in 2016, whites accounted for 71.5% of the 701,000 sworn local police officers in the U.S. African Americans account for 11.4% of local police forces, a drop from 11.9% in 2013. The nationwide averages mask bigger gaps in big cities, which are both less white and have more police per capita than many small towns. Police experts say black recruits face nepotism, more problems during background checks, greater barriers to promotion, and higher discipline rates once hired. In other words, the entire recruiting process and resources devoted to it needs to be reformed, says Russell.
You have to recruit people for real, the same way IBM recruits, the same way Amazon recruits. If we want to be looked at that way, if we really want to change the community, how much money are we putting in recruitment? Because if it's $26,000, that's not enough. That's not enough.
All right, and we are back. So, gentlemen, I would like to get your thoughts on that in terms of a systemic approach to finding ways to recruit more blacks into law enforcement. And let's see, Charlie, are you with us? Can you hear us? You're on mute.
Song.
Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. On with us today, we have former Connecticut State Trooper Lindsey Brown and former Connecticut State Trooper Leon Pierce. So, Charlie, if you can just briefly just talk about why you went into law enforcement, how your family, friends, circles of folks, how they responded when you became a police officer, and then talk about some of the recruitment that you were able to do here in the city of Springfield. I just want to get you caught up and get our viewers caught up.
Okay. I originally came from the prison system, from working in the prison. I left the prison finding that that wasn't what I really wanted. I found myself in the Springfield Police Department, ended up doing 34 years and retiring, holding different positions. And one of those positions was being the recruitment officer for the city of Springfield, trying to hire minorities and blacks onto this job, which was very, very difficult. The biggest problem that we had for a longest time was trying to deal with the community, which a lot of us was out there, and trying to get them to be cadets first before even being police officers. We ran various programs, well, I ran various programs for kids to come in, but it took a lot of footwork. It wasn't something that the department set up. I actually went out, started going to community centers, going to high schools, going to playgrounds, going to just different areas, basketball games, you name it, where everybody was, so that I could start looking for strong candidates to come do this job. A lot of people look at me and go, well, why did you want to do this job? And at first, I had to explain to them, I really didn't want to be one first. It wasn't where I started out as. It turned out later on that I was originally hired as a police photographer because that was my background. When the budget cuts came around, I ended up being on the street, and they gave me the opportunity to be in uniform. Once I became in uniform, I just kind of made it work for me. Doing 15 years of midnights, I found my way through the neighborhoods I grew up in, talking to a lot of people and building a strong relationship within the community, to the point where I had community people, families, if they had problems in a situation, call me. So my biggest thing was trying to pose and play that role as a police officer that people could actually trust, believe in, and want their children to be like. I came out on the street and basically I handled the situation because I didn't change who I was and what I did. Basically, being in the gang unit, being in the detective bureau, being in the street crimes unit, being even the chief's liaison aide to him, I had to change a lot of perceptions. A lot of people looked at things. When I first came on this job, there were 32 black officers, 9 Spanish, and there were 465 whites on this job. A lot of us found ourselves in a lot of walking posts, and we weren't in a lot of jobs. Where I say, like, in valid areas like the detective bureau, we weren't in those bureaus. We weren't in traffic bureau. We weren't in that. A lot of us were just plain uniform. We had to work our way up to make it happen. We had to get people that we work with confidence, because their confidence level in us being on the job was a whole nother different thing. So when I decided to get on this job and really push and become that recruitment officer, I would push people to talk about this job as a rewarding job, because we want to talk about life in general. A lot of people got lost, not trying to find themselves, finding a career. So when I talked about careers and I talked about what you can do to make change, this is how I made my approach on the street. I talked to a lot of brothers who are out here, and I go, you ran the street, you did your hustle, you did your thing. So now it's time to be a real man and do things a little differently. How are you going to be? Where are you going to be in the next 5 years? How are you going to make things happen? Well, Charlie, I got a record. I did some things. I go, well, let me take a look at them. A lot of them weren't felonies. A lot of them were crazy little misdemeanors. So as I looked at applicants who came in who were non-minority, they had the same type of misdemeanor crimes, but they became cops. So I told them it has nothing to do with that. It's who you are now, what you are now, and what you're about to do with yourself. So I pushed them on that level to make sure that they could understand that we all need a place out here. We need our voices heard. We need people to see us in our neighborhoods to understand that in order to build trust and relationships, they got to find people that they want to see all the time. And this is what ended up, when I say working in our community, it wasn't a neighborhood I didn't work in. Since I grew up here, my family grew up here. I came from a very large family of 13. Everybody kind of like knew my family one way around. But when I became that police officer, my family didn't want me to at first, but understood my role and what I did, and they supported me. And then I started to get community leaders. I started to get the community to look for me, talk to me. So we end up solving a lot of crimes. We end up talking to a lot of kids, and eventually end up getting a lot of young blacks and on this job finally, but it took a little while to do that.
Okay, thank you. So At this time, I'd like to open it up to you guys. Rob, if you have any questions, just jump in there. I just want to make sure people got familiar with these folks, understand what their role was while they were serving, why they decided to serve, and let's talk about that. So, what needs to happen next, Charlie? I know I worked with you a lot, hitting radio stations, community meetings. I think we did a little bit of everything.
Right.
Debunking all the different myths about law enforcement and coming on the radio and on the newspaper and like really breaking things down for people, because historically non-blacks officers have a tendency to say, look, this is what happened, that's it, and that's it. And we would go in there, we'd break it down for them and get people to understand what law enforcement was all about, coming to the community, breaking down the process of, you guys would break down what the process of investigation was, why they weren't getting instantaneous responses, all that stuff, which is great stuff. How do we take that and create a system for law enforcement? What do we do next? Because it looks like, based on the reports, the numbers are declining. A lot of you brothers are, aging out. You're retiring. So who are we replacing you with? And what should we do next? How can the community get involved in this process? Because it just can't be like a Lindsay, a Leon, or a Charlie hit the neighborhood. There's got to be community partners in all of this. So let's talk about that.
No, but you're right. There has to be community involvement. There has to be people who basically, everybody has their children, their nephews, their nieces, next door neighbors. There are young brothers out here who would like to do this job. They don't know who to believe, who to talk to, and I think we need to get out here on a stronger recruitment level and talk to them. Right. I mean, make them understand what the job is, what the job entails, how things are, but really building off the fact that it's a career that's going to help you, but it's a rewarding career. Right. And when I say rewarding career, I have to use in general of when I talk to them, the things that make me feel like it's rewarding. When I talked about being in a house with 6 parents, with 6 adults, and we went on a call where I had a child not breathing, but I have 6 adults in here who don't know how to do CPR. So to run up there and manage to save a life, you get people to listen to your story and, wow, you did all that.
But check it. That's still an individual effort. How do we do the collective effort? I look at the cats who live that street life. Man, it seems like everybody promotes for them, whether intentionally or not. We're always talking about, these kids ain't got no choice but to work the streets. They ain't got no choice but to be on the streets. How do we create, let me just say this. How do we create that environmental change? We're talking about law enforcement the same way we talk about becoming a DJ, becoming an accountant or a lawyer. How do we change the narrative on that?
It's just more in the approach of how do we talk. We have to come in with a very strong positive level when we're coming in to talk. Okay. I mean, there's a whole lot of other things that can take them to the left and the right. Everybody's had their run-ins with police. Everybody's has their misconceptions. So we have to come with a whole nother different, not necessarily story, but we have to lay it out to make them understand there's more behind just the word being a cop, and make you understand there's more to it that you get a lot out of. And it deals more with a lot of communication and talking. We don't have cops out there talking to people on a regular basis anyway. So a lot of them go, why should I listen to them? People know us. People know us and know what you do. They have the respect for us, but it's not like anybody's out there talking. And you made that point. You made that point before when you said, what are we doing now? You never hear about there are recruitments where you're seeing nothing but people out there trying to recruit blacks and minorities onto this job. You don't see this. You just hear about there's a police test coming up and everybody should apply for it.
Yep, that's fair.
That's all you hear. You don't hear anything else. So there's nobody talking hands-on. And most of the time, I don't care if you're a sheriff, I don't care if you're a police officer, I don't care if you're state police. People want to talk to people one-on-one. People want to talk and hear. Not necessarily like all the things that you did, but they need to hear something.
Okay. So in other words, so visibility is critical.
Yes, absolutely.
You gotta be visible, and you have to establish a presence. I'm gonna have some of these guys jump in right along with you. I want to make sure everybody gets involved in this conversation. Lindsay, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Same thing we talked about with Charlie. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you got to have a targeted approach to communities that look like us, and I mean targeted. And Leon said this earlier. It can't just be 1 or 2 people in the recruitment unit for a department of thousands. Some departments have thousands of people on them. You can't have 2 or 3 or 4 people in a department with 1,000 people. We barely, in my career, had over 1,000 people at any one time, troopers. There were 2 people in the recruitment unit. That's why people running those units, like Leon was calling me, asking me, hey, can you go to New York? Can you go to this college? Absolutely, every time, right? You gotta have a bigger unit to reach out to more people. You got to get into, like Charlie said, you got to get into the community. You got to build rapport with the community. And I guess I'm a little biased, so in my respect, but you got to start young, right? Yeah. You got to catch them. I was catching kids in my Explore program at 14 years old, right? Mind you, I started that 20 years ago. And it's the relationship between the communities of color and law enforcement has gotten a lot worse since then. Absolutely. A lot worse. And it was bad then, but it's a lot worse now, right? You got to start changing their minds young. You got to start giving them something to look forward to. There shouldn't be a reason why me in my 20th year, driving through my community, running into kids that still haven't seen a black state trooper before. Yeah. You can't have that. There's no reason for it. And trust me, there are a lot of brothers that were Connecticut State Troopers that were from my neighborhood. And we all know each other. And I relied on them for a pretty good portion of the 10 years that I ran my Explore program. But you got to have targeted approaches. You got to beef up the recruiting units. You got to get to HBCUs. You got to recruit aggressively. You got to do it in a couple of ways. You got to recruit aggressively at the college level, because you want those kids coming right out. And I know a lot of departments are moving away from the military, but you can still recruit a lot of people that were former military into law enforcement also, right? It's a great source. I'm one of them, right? And I know a lot of others who are good people and want to do the right thing and always have in their careers, right? But you got to start, if you want long-term, because this is going to take long-term. What we're talking about tonight is going to take another 20 years to accomplish, right? So you got to start young. It took me, my first guy that came on the job, he was 16 when I met him. He was 24, 23 when he became a trooper. All right. That's 7-8 years it took to train him. And that's even before he went to the academy. He got to the academy. He's like, this is easy. You put me through hell. The academy was a piece of cake. Right. But it takes that long to build them and to train them and give them the right ideology, because like the video said, that stuff's taught at leadership, right? So your job and my job and Rob's job working with me in my Explore program was to teach them that everything that you've heard about law enforcement, a lot of it's true, even the bad parts, right? But there's a lot more benefit to it also. And you can change that. And you can't change it running up and down the street waving flags. You just can't do it. You got to infiltrate it from within. What do the feds do when they wanted to break up one of our organizations back in the day? They tore it down from within, right? Any organization you have like that, where there are rotten apples at the top, you got to tear it down from within. You have to get people who look like us in there representing our own communities, represent our own interests, so that we can have more of a say in what goes on within our communities. Because if you have a reputation, I know I did. I was told I had an attitude, what we call FTO, and Leon knows this. I was told I had an attitude a week off FTO because I didn't want to get donuts and coffee for the guys on midnight shift, because I was waiting for a phone call from a burglary victim. So it was more important for me to go and get their coffee than it was for me to field that telephone call from that burglary victim. I stood my ground and I won the individual battle, but by the time I got transferred to another troop, I had an attitude problem. And I didn't care, right? And I didn't care about it, right? Because what that told them is, okay, we're not going to get this one. He's not going to be the one that we can influence and teach to do wrong things. I walk my path in my career with integrity, and I try to do the best I could in every step. And I had role models like Leon, like other brothers, like Keith Price, right? Those were my role models.
Okay.
You know, taught me to do things the right way. So you got to start young. You got to have a massive, aggressive recruitment efforts into communities of color, and you have to have more than just one Charlie Yeomans. You got to have more than one Leon Pierce and more than one Lindsey Brown.
True.
Okay. Leon, question for you. What do you do when you got the old guard within these departments who still had that 1960, 1970 mentality? What can the community do to get more involved in that process? We have a commissioner now who said publicly during a roundtable forum that she doesn't see racism, therefore systemic racism does not exist. How can aside from like really contributing to the recruitment efforts, making sure that our media entities are involved in the process, making sure organizations like the NAACP, Urban League, and any other ad hoc group that sprouts up, make sure that they're involved in the process. How do we counter that other than protesting with picket signs? Because I know from up here being on the other side of that wall, they're looking at watching everybody through the cameras, and it doesn't create any change. So how do we change that?
So I'm a firm believer in communication,
Okay.
and I think that the first off from the law enforcement side, the message needs to come down from the top that we are looking to go into the communities and tell them who we are, and firstly denounce all the things that you've seen in the media that the law enforcement agencies have done, and say this is not who we are. We are here to serve the community, and we need you to help us do our jobs to be more effective. When you recruit from the community and people are seeing that the people that are now part of the police department were once people in the community, that's just going to build trust within the law enforcement agency. And essentially that's where you derive your power from within law enforcement. You can't force people to do your will as a law enforcement agency in this day and age. You need for true power, you need the law enforcement agencies to have unquestioned integrity, and you do that by gaining the trust of the people. When they feel that you can go look into their car and you're not going to put something in there that wasn't in there before you looked in it. When they feel like they can go over at 2:00 in the morning and that they're going to be okay after the motor vehicle stop. That's when you can do your jobs effectively. And when people in the community see others that they knew 10, 15 years ago doing that job, there's a bit of trust and respect. And that also begins to inspire that other generation, the people underneath them that want to be police officers now. So it's a process that is it may start off slow, but as you gain momentum and gain ground, you need to build upon it. And lastly, it needs to be a full department approach. It can't be just minority officers. It needs to be because most law enforcement agencies are predominantly. So if you're going to take a large scale approach, you need to make sure that the message comes down from the top that we want a diverse environment. That makes us that much more effective.
Okay.
Yeah. I got a couple observations and a question. So one of the things we know, some of the trials and tribulations we have in recruiting Black males and females into law enforcement. And one of the things that Lindsey said that resonated with me, one of the things I respected about him is, when he's on the job, he's representing not only himself and the community. Now let's say you're on the job and you see some nonsense going on. How do you address that scenario? Because they always say, the bad apples spoil the bunch, and it's a few bad apples, but then you have a lot of people just sitting around, not correcting other officers. And we're all old enough to know KRS-One's song Black Cop. So, that perception of law enforcement towards white cops is also aimed at those Black cops who are operating poorly. How do you comport yourselves to let people know when you come on the scene that whatever you're doing, that's not going down like that? And let me ask that to Lindsay, because Lindsay and I talked about that first, and then we'll go to Leon and Charlie.
You're muted.
Your
Lynn.
mute's on.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that goes back to my first few weeks on the job. I made it clear, and the troop where I was working at was known to be a certain type of troop. Weren't many brothers down there. But like I said, I walked my career with the best integrity that I could, and I didn't allow for joking, racial jokes, a lot of that nonsense that goes on. When I'm on a scene, and I was vocal about it, with a lot of people. I had a trooper refer to another trooper as someone from a movie, and I ignored him until he said his name, and he knew what I was doing. So you have to let them know that you don't play that game, because once they get you once, then they feel they got a hook. So you can joke around with them and it's just a cultural joke. It's just all in fun. People are different. I know it's just jokes. But a lot of them aren't thinking that way. And there's a time and place for it. And it's certainly not in uniform when you're at a scene, right? Certainly not in uniform when you're being serious about your job and what you're trying to do in your community. So you have to set yourself apart and let other officers whose intention might be to try to push your buttons, because they will antagonize you and push you to see how far you'll go and what you're willing to accept, and whether or not you're willing to cross that humane line to that blue line, right? Because you see a lot of cops saying, I don't see color, I just support cops. So you can't be a cop and not see color. You can't not recognize that certain people are treated one way and other people are treated in another way. You can't be blind to it, is what I'm saying, right? So you have to set yourself apart and let them know from Jump Street, I don't play that. I know a guy who went along, who played the game, who got into the cultural jokes and the racial jokes and the games until they got him real good, and then he wanted to make a complaint, and his complaint went right down the toilet because they had already proved that he was dishing them out just as much as he was taking them.
Right.
So his credibility is down the toilet. And I always told him, man, you need to stop doing all that, because first of all, you're making your own culture look bad. You're making your family look bad, and you're making me look bad because you're allowing it. And sometimes they think they can get away with me, right? So you have to set yourself apart right away from Jump Street and let them know and check them, and not be afraid to run up to your supervisors and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this guy, this girl, whoever it is. They did this, either handle it. I had an incident later on in my career where I had a guy who I knew my whole career. His brother did my background, and he made a comment to me, and I laid him up. And 2 weeks later, he retired because he didn't have much time left. He did not have much time left because I was about to get him. Right. So you have to set yourself apart from people right away, and you can't fall into that good old boy organization and I'm a cop, so everybody's a scumbag. No, everybody's not a scumbag.
Right. Leon. So thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah. So for me, it's easy. Like I don't tolerate police misconduct, and it's easy for somebody who's been the victim of it to be less accepting of it. So because of what I've been through, and you take that oath to do the right thing, I don't allow it. I've never witnessed it. And during my time, I've worked in internal affairs. I've investigated it, and I did what I was supposed to do, and that was it. I don't think there's a place for it in law enforcement, because you're supposed to do the right thing, and there are people out there that don't, and hopefully, the department deals with them and they get what they deserve. But as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen it, and I wouldn't tolerate it.
Okay. Charlie.
No, I mean, we all been through it, all of us. I mean, straightening out people I rode with well, let me give you a little real quick. When I first got in the cruiser, I rode with somebody who let me know that it said it quit. Yo, boy, I want to let it know, boy, you don't touch the radio and you don't talk at the scene. I'm like, that's fine. Anything else? You just don't do that. I'm just letting you know your place. Well, it seems that the call that we had was on the 4th floor. When we got on the 4th floor and I handled the call, you were still at the bottom of the stairs. We had a conversation later on. You want me to save you? The next time you want to come up some stairs, we're going to get rid of that boy thing because that doesn't exist.
Right.
And then to be on a scene, he was the very first person after he got corrected where somebody made a joke about, oh, these people. Somebody goes, Charlie's standing right there. Right, because I'm not going to tolerate it. I don't tolerate it and I don't take it. I mean, I might be your boy. I might be your boy for when I was probation because I didn't know any better and I first got on this job. And it's like, I don't want to say nothing to do something to jeopardize me because I can't say what I want and I got to get by that 90-day probation. But when that 90-day got over, everybody got corrected. Everybody got said something. You're never going to say nothing like this ever to me. And then to go to a supervisor to let them know when I did have a problem, you need to correct that person regardless of how long they've been on there, or him and I can't ride together, okay? Or we can't be together because he's going to want me to save him. And I'm going to think about the things that were said, and you're not going to like what I'm going to do. So we have to look at things different. And then a lot of times being on the scene, whether I was in the gang unit or whether I was with uniform, my presence was always strong so that when somebody saw you, it's like, I didn't take the same mess that everybody else might have been dishing at. When somebody said, wow, well, you know how this neighborhood is. I would say, what do you mean this neighborhood? This neighborhood ain't no different than the neighborhood you live in. This is not how it is. Charlie, I didn't mean it like that. I know you didn't mean it like that. So we're going to let that go and we're going to handle things the way it's supposed to be. And this is how it goes. You know, so I had a lieutenant that I looked up to because he was the man when I came on here. He's the one that schooled all of us. And like I told you, when we first came on, it was only 32 of us. But he was in our behind 24/7. The way we looked, the way we carried ourselves and everything else, I never lost that way in almost the 35 years I've been on this job. It didn't stop me. And now any person who came up behind me or anywhere I was, those words kept coming to me. I had to carry myself with integrity, with dignity out here so that people will always look at me. I don't care what they looked at the other people, but they will look at me like, yo, he got it together out here. And a lot of times, we have to correct people because the third, the fourth, the fifth generation of some of these people who have been on these jobs, they forget. They think they can talk like the fathers and the uncles and everybody else, and it don't go that way. So they have to be corrected so that when we go to neighborhoods and go to calls, I thought we came to this call as being a cop because like you guys, I've heard that, yo, Charlie, it's not about you being colored. You know, we're all blue. No. I'm blue and I'm also of color. So let's get this straight about how this got to be. So you're not going to make these kind of conversations or you're not going to talk this way out there. And a lot of people started understanding that even more so when I became the defensive tactics instructor. And now your concept of whatever you thought and how things were, I go, this is how we handle people in all different neighborhoods. So we got to get rid of some of that. And it's almost like you have to make a point in so many different ways. So I agree with a lot of things that you all are saying. That's all.
Now, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with the brother who was on the Springfield Police Department. We were at a little social outing, all, middle class folks. We were all hanging out. It's like we were part of a group called Ebon. And the brother looked at me and Denise Jordan, who eventually went on to become the first black chief of staff in the city of Springfield. And he says, I'm going to tell you right now, when I put my uniform on, I don't see black people. You're all the enemy. How do you deal with folks internally? And Charlie, I think you know who it is. How do you deal with folks on the inside? All right. We have to fight to make sure these doors are constantly opening. That's a constant battle to make sure that there's equity, to make sure that there's, the hiring is done unequivocally, across the board. and everybody gets a fair shot. But what do you do when you open the doors and there's somebody from the neighborhood who says, I don't care, when I put my uniform on, bro, you're a criminal. How do you deal with your colleagues in situations like that? And I know it's not common, but there are those, because I know one personally. How do you deal with those folks?
Yo, brother, it's a hard 8 hours in the car with somebody. It's a hard 8 hours, especially when you're trying to establish yourself about the way people think. And sometimes it's like, look, I'm not going to take away from your opinion, but when we are with people and we're trying to take care of something, your opinion to whatever goes on is your opinion. But remember, I'm standing there with you. You're not going to talk this way. You're not going to be this way. We're going to handle the situation so when people leave us, they're going to go that both of those cops did everything in their power to help us.
Right.
And then you're not going to be that opinionated person. But we all have been there in those cruisers with those type people who think that way. And we're never going to really change them.
Right.
But
so
we're going to get them to understand who we are, who you work with, and that's all.
So you check them whether they're black, white, blue, or brown. If somebody's got to be checked, if they don't have the correct attitude, they get checked.
Completely.
Right.
Completely.
Okay. I can dig it. I can dig it. Now I got one more clip, and then I'm gonna let you guys comment. And I promise we're not gonna hold y'all hostage all night. But I just feel like this is a necessary conversation. We'll be playing this all week long, because regardless of how people feel about law enforcement, how anti-police you are, when someone kicks in your door, someone puts a gun to your head, someone beats the crap out of your son, the first thing you do is what? You still dial 911. I don't care how hard a thug you are. I don't care if you're the sweetest woman in the church and your son is the hardest cat on the street. When things go south, we pick up the phone and we call the police. And then we get concerned when a police officer comes and we get one of them guys who come with those hostile attitudes towards black folks. And then we get upset. So we have to have these types of conversations because we need more recruits in law enforcement. We got to. And I think we have to change that. If you're concerned about who's defending your neighborhood, who's coming out to protect you, then do the job yourself. Or convince your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew. We all got, young cats that we know who are unemployed. Good people. But it's like, get off the couch. Think about law enforcement. And I think these are conversations that we need to have more often. It's very rare. I done sat in all types of forums. I'm 56. Over the last 30 years, I've been involved in my community in one way or another. And I don't think I've ever been invited to sit on a panel to talk about how we recruit more blacks into law enforcement. This isn't just the responsibility of a Leon Pierce or a Lindsey Brown or a Charlie Yeomans. I think we all have a collective responsibility. Charlie, whenever you went out, and just so folks know, me and Charlie, we kind of worked together kind of tightly for about 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
Between the mayor's office and the police department, because the onus isn't just on active law enforcement officers to go out there and recruit folks. I think we all have responsibility. Whether we work in insurance like Rob, or whatever it is I do now, if you're an accountant, it doesn't matter. I think we all have an active responsibility. But I think we also need to make sure that we're there to support officers once they complete their academies and they get their badge and they become officers. I think the community has to be there for them. You can't do like you would a politician, help get them in office and then turn around. I think we have to be there for our officers. And I'm going to show this one quick clip. I might not even show the whole thing, about an officer who talks about the cultural duality. We're in that blue suit, but when he takes that blue suit off, or gray suit, whatever the color suit may be, he's still another black man in America. So I just want to play this real quick.
Finally tonight, let's meet a St. Paul, Minnesota police officer who tells CBS's Jamie Yukas this moment in time is painful and personal.
Officer Antoine Denson remembers the moment he decided to become a police officer. He was 12 years old.
A Caucasian law enforcement officer got out of his vehicle. The whole entire bus stop was black. He searched every single one of us. And so I took it upon myself to try to make a difference for my people.
You became a law enforcement officer, from what I'm hearing, because of racial inequality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, You know, that's the most hurtful thing when I was hearing, you know, you don't belong here.
Those memories flooded back to him last week as he stood among the protesters in front of the governor's mansion. The crowd yelled for the police to leave.
You can't come in here. You're not welcome.
A news reporter caught Denson in the light blue shirt on one knee, crying.
I told him I can't take my skin off. You know, I can take this uniform off, but I can't take I'm a black man. Mr. Floyd, that could be me. That could be my children.
He said his tears were for his two sons, Jalen and Antoine Jr.
How do you have conversations with them about what's going on?
I just try to be truthful to them. I listen.
Listening, learning, and now acting, helping the community heal.
We can't say, well, that's not me, or we got bad apples. This is always us as a whole. We are sorry.
I think to hear you say you're sorry is one of the most powerful things I've ever heard.
Thank you. Right now, the country and the world is hurting. And this is a 400 plus years of hurt. And I know a lot of people say, I understand. Well, no, I live it. I'm black. And we need to have a dialogue and talk about it.
And now he wants to be sure black voices are heard within the Brotherhood in Blue. Jamie Yukas, CBS News, St. Paul.
About to go back on.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is I have a different dynamic. I mean, these gentlemen have been on the job. I originally tried out for the Connecticut State Police, and I got all the way through the process of I got through the physical, the written, and I remember they were calling me the Green Mile when I was running around the track. I don't know who was saying that, and that might have been you, Leon. But I was in the insurance business, and I had a myopic look at it because I was making a lot of money, and basically my salary would have been cut in half. But if I had a long-term view of it, I probably would have most likely stuck out through the process to become a Connecticut State Trooper. But my grandfather was the first black cop in Medford, Massachusetts. And when I was a little kid, all our uncles, male uncles, and uncles and male cousins would come over on Sundays, and I'm just seeing all these big people in the house, and my grandfather would be talking to them about how to engage, if you ever encounter the police. And, it really didn't hit me until I got older, when my grandfather retired, and I would hear my relatives regale over the stories of sitting in the living room listening to Rudy. That's what they called him, Rudy. And some of the things that he had to deal with back after World War II, being the first black cop. But it's interesting when you have kids and you're concerned like that officer was. When you have your uniform on, it's different. And then when you take it off, because there's been instances around the country where black officers have been shot off duty by officers within their own precinct because they don't have their uniform on. And that's something that we really, really need to be mindful of. And that's another stain and just another limiter when it comes to black people being open to jumping on the force. That's my observation of that clip.
I guess.
Go ahead, Lizzie.
I think he speaks for a lot of us. He speaks for a lot of us that are out here trying to do the right thing. And people forget about the psychological and mental toughness that it takes to be in certain career fields, right? You get criticized from every angle there is. From everyone, you get criticized from your community, you get criticized from your department, you get criticized from the people you're trying to help. It takes a lot of mental toughness to do the job. You'll have to have a really good support system in place for you in order to be successful. If you don't, you could very well go from good cop, bad cop very quickly if you don't have the mental fortitude to resist a lot of the negativity that you will encounter. you're already going to be traumatized. There isn't a cop I've ever met that spent any time as a cop that hasn't received some kind of trauma as a result of their time on a job. It happens. You can't unsee the things you do. You can't unexperience the things you've experienced. You just have to learn how to live with it and how to cope with it. And I know one of my former bosses, we talked a lot about coping skills during roll calls and how do we deal with certain things that we were dealing with during our day. But it takes, and I know we're talking about recruitment, so I just want to go back to that for a second. You have to bear in mind the mental toughness that it takes. Some people develop it over time. Some people come on a job and they're not as mentally tough as they think they are, and then they develop a toughness. But again, that could go it could swing back and forth. You can go from a bad cop to just not caring, right? You could be a level cop and do your career, professionally all the way, and then at the very end say, I'm not doing anything else. Don't ask me to do anything, right? Or I know I was like that my last month on the job. I tell you that right now. If we're being totally honest, leave me alone. I'll come to work. I'll do my job, but I'm not doing anything extra. I was too close to the end, right? But we all experienced that. But when I left the job, I was working at the airport, right? That's where my troop H, I was assigned up there most of my time. I spent some time in intel, organized crime, and gangs too. So, and as a school resource officer and on patrol as a patrol trooper. So I did quite a few things in my career. But I never in my life, during my career, felt the pressure that I did while walking through the airport and I just retired 4 years ago. So I got there in 2013. From 2013 to 2017, I walked through that airport almost every day. And it was a totally different feeling from when I first came on the job and up until that point, because the stares and the negativity that I experienced from people from our community and from every other community was different. Policing felt different. It felt like I validated in my own mind, I validated myself. Okay, you're doing the right thing by retiring, because at that point I had gotten to the point in my career where I didn't want the criticism anymore. I felt like I had done enough in my community. I felt like I had done enough in my career to make my parents proud and my kids proud, so that I can move on with the next phase of my life. Right. So you endure a lot of mental stress during your career, and if you're not mentally capable of doing that, you could go from good cop to bad cop, or just start off if you got the wrong support system around you. And Charlie mentioned this earlier when he talked about nepotism, the third, fourth generation family. I know a family of 4, great grandfather, grandfather, father, and son is on the job right now, right? So it's a real thing. Guess who they've been trained by? The other, right? Wow. So they already come onto the job with their own perception of how they're going to treat people and how they should treat people. And if it's not the proper, and if that training isn't done with dignity and integrity, like Leon mentioned earlier, you're going to get a horrible cop. You're going to get a cop who thinks like Rob just said. I think it was Rob. We're all blue. You're on my side. I don't care if you're black. You're my brother. And you better care that I'm black, because when a racist white cop is on my ass, you better be saving me. Right? Because it ain't going to happen to you. It's going to happen to me. Yeah. Right? So I wanted to throw that in there, because you have to, when it comes to recruiting, you got to try to assess someone's mental state and whether or not they could handle that types of stress, being yelled at, having things thrown at you, being spit on, all kinds of things. You can't talk about recruitment without talking about that aspect of it, because you just can't say, I'm just going to go recruit a bunch of brothers that graduate college and think they're all qualified as cops. Because let me tell you something. Hey, I know some guys that I don't know how they got on the job, but they did. Okay. True. But you have to, you just got to consider, more than just, let's go sign some brothers up and get them on a job because we need more brothers in our community. It's deeper than that. It's a lot deeper than that. You have to assess them. And Leon and Charlie know this probably more than I do, because they worked in those units. I worked from the ground level up, working with youngsters and trying to prepare them.
But it's interesting you say that, Lindsay, because in other communities, I look in the Latino community, there's no pre-assessment. They don't critique them as hard. They just grab them. Just go apply. And I think I had the same conversation with a friend of mine. We worked at City Hall together. And they, we can't just hire anybody. We have to make sure they're the right one. But the Irish, they don't care how crazy Nephew Tommy is. They push Nephew Tommy to do it. I don't know. I guess I'm from the school of thought that says, yo, I'm going to put them all in the basket and be like, you just go. If you get weeded out along the line, then we're going to find more. And we just got to get people in there until we get the right people. It's hard because we never know how people are going to react, actually, until they're on the job. And as you talk about the nepotism part, Rob, was you at Anna Maria College when we went and gave the lecture to the students, the students up at Anna Maria? And we had the guy who said, we're talking. And the guy's like, nah. I know about the blacks because my cousin's a cop in Springfield, and he tells us about the blacks all the time. And what he's telling us is completely different from what you told us. So,
you guys are naturally aggressive. And I was like, I mean, he got castigated. We got in his behind.
Oh, he got blown up.
The fact that he can say that in an open room of like 55, 60 students during a dinner and dialogue was troubling.
I was told that young man is now a police officer. So the thing is, I think, Lizzie, I hear where you're going, but I think sometimes we spend more time vetting folks from our community because we want to make sure that, we put our name down, we put our name on the right one. And I think there's just so many brothers. I mean, if they can survive all the other stuff that they may possibly get into, I think they can survive. I think they can survive it.
It's not impossible. It's not. I mean, you have to understand when you're talking to individuals, just like when I went into colleges, left and right here, Connecticut, I would go in, I would walk into criminal justice classes and I would tell people straight out, as I talked about this job, I go, some of you are in the wrong field. Some of you, I don't even know why you're here. I don't even know why you're in this room. This is not what you really want to do. Some of you might come on this job for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
If you're going to come to this job, come with heart. You got to come with integrity to do this job, because this job is not filled with everything that you think. And it's not television. It's not. This job takes more out of you than you can think. The devastation, the despair, the anger, the rewards, the feeling of doing something, all of that comes with this job, and it's hard. Everybody who comes through the door, everyone can dress nice, get past the test, pass the physical, get past the psychological, and you don't show who the real you are, and we don't find them until later. And this is what we deal with a lot of. A lot of people we recruit in the door, and they come in this way, and later on, that real side of them comes out, and we're like, never knew that person was like this.
Okay.
And this is what happens in a lot of police departments, because there's no way to screen it. There's no way to see it. There's no way to actually pinpoint it the way you think you can. It's not going to come that way. Mm-hmm. But the real people come out, and we find out that we're trying to deal with individuals on here who shouldn't have been cops in the first place, but they're cops now. So how do we make this work and get other people to realize that not everybody's like them? We are out here doing things, but we need more people like us in here and to be on this job.
And let me just say this. I know and Rob knows my story. When I was in high school, I was that kid. When I told my guidance counselor I wanted to go off to college, he laughed at me. Told me I needed discipline and I need to go into the military. I got so many stories from people like that who assess my potential without even asking me about whether or not I can do this or not. If somebody had talked to me about law enforcement when I was in high school, that could have been a viable option. I never knew I could sit there and work for a politician for 12 years with the stuff that comes along with that. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like sometimes we just don't know. And I think when it comes down to recruitment, whether we're recruiting folks to run for office, recruiting people to become state troopers, police officers, attorneys, whatever the case may be, I think sometimes, man, the most effective trial is trial by fire.
True.
Because I'm sure looking at the three of y'all, I'm sure at some point somebody says, I don't know if that dude will make a good cop. So it's kind of like, not to disagree with you in public, Lindsay, but it's the conversation that we have to have.
No. I don't see it as a disagreement at all. I see it as an addition.
Right.
I don't see it a disagreement at all. Go ahead, Leon.
No, I was just going to say, I think you have to assess when you come across situations, whether someone is worth helping or whether they're just not going to make it. And I remember my first time I was out with Lindsay, and we were at a scene where it was kind of traumatic. It involved a death, and Lindsay, I don't know how much time he had on, but I said, let me see your statement.
A few months.
So he gave me his statement, and I read it, and I said, well, you might want to add this, you might want to do this, you might want to do that. So, I helped him along, and I think that everyone has that responsibility, whether person's black or white or male or female, to make sure that they're doing the right thing on the job, because they're going to make the job that much better, And just to kind of touch upon earlier about being mentally tough, you're right. You do have to be mentally tough in this job, because not only for the things that you're going to experience, but you have to be strong for other people, and the things and for me, I know personally, when you talk about integrity and walking the blue line and all, none of that matters to me. What matters to me is that my 3 daughters don't see their father on the news being investigated for some police misconduct or doing something wrong or breaking the law, and that's it. And as long as they don't see me, and as long as I don't let them down, that's I can never go wrong in this profession.
That's fair enough. Fair to say. Definitely fair. Gentlemen, we are at the 1 hour, 20-minute mark. I promised you all 60 minutes. We're at the 121. So I don't want to hold him. I'm just hold you guys up. I'm hoping that we can come back and have a follow-up to this conversation, because I'm hoping that we can get some of the folks from those community organizations, those community organizers who are kind of wrapped up in the protest stuff, but not wrapped up in trying to do something about creating systemic change. And I think what you guys have done, not just as law enforcement officers, but even in terms of bringing more people on to join the cause, I think that does more than 5,000 people picketing outside of a mayor's home. I think we have to get involved in this process. We have to change. He says it's difficult to change from the inside. I understand that, but it's the long game that counts. Having the pleasure, Mr. Pierce, this is my first time meeting you. But knowing Charlie and Lindsay as I do, is kind of like, man, stand up individuals, all 3 of you. We need more people like y'all to replace y'all. I would love for someone to have a conversation with my son as he decides what his future is going to be, because we just have no idea. We just got to get these young brothers on there, sisters as well. Rob, is there anything you want to add, sir?
No, I think this is a great conversation, and there's different levels to this conversation, and we definitely want these guys to come back and talk about the different levels of this conversation. And I guess tonight we talked about recruitment, but there are other aspects that we want to get into as it relates to the Black community.
Right. And if you notice, I didn't get into how people should react or respond when they're pulled over. I just really want to focus on the recruitment aspects of it and make sure that, if there's any, if you got, again, son, daughter, niece, nephew, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do, listen, man, have them contact somebody. I don't know who's on the police department now that fills your role, Charlie, but I'm just talking about the Springfield area. It's kind of like contact somebody, man, inquire, get the information, and explore this possibility. I just want to make sure that people understand where their options are. So with that, closing remarks, Charlie, I'll go from top to bottom. Closing remarks, anything you want to say to the public before we end this broadcast?
Listen, on a positive level, I think recruitment is positive. I'm being on this job this long. I love my role. I love being a cop. I did. It hurts, even only being retired 2 years. It hurts to hear a cruiser go by and like, yeah, this ain't me. I don't know why. Hopefully it'll get fixed later on. But right now, I still got that feeling. And when I talk to people, I want more people to be involved and be on this job, because to me, it's still rewarding. Yeah. It still has a lot and it means a lot. And when I talk to people, I put a lot of heart in it. So whatever you want to do on recruiting aspect, I feel like I want to be there, because I'm willing to reach out and talk, because there's a lot of people who are not hearing what needs to be heard from people like us who've been there and done this. That's my answer.
All right, thank you. Mr. Pierce?
I guess since this is a recruiting forum, and I guess what I'll finish up with is just some words of wisdom that I would always give people that want to be in law enforcement, you have to set yourself apart and be a leader right now and conduct yourself in such a way that you believe a police officer should conduct themselves. But while you're thinking about going into law enforcement, you have to understand that there are a lot of people that want to be police officers, and there's very few spots. So you have to learn to set yourself apart. So you have to make sure that you put yourself in positions of leadership to show that you're mature and you have good judgment. You make sure that you don't make bad decisions. If you're 21 years old and you're able to obtain alcoholic beverages, you don't want to get behind the wheel of a car. You want to make sure that you don't get involved in criminal behavior. You want to stay away from all the illegal drugs, and you want to stay away from criminal behavior. You are trying to build a profile right now because, like I said, when I went out for my employer, there were about 3,000 applicants for about 100 positions. That's your competition. So set yourself apart. If you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about law enforcement, you got to walk that line, that same line that you think police officers should walk when they're on the job in a uniform. And thank you for having me tonight.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. Mr. Brown?
I'm going to segue off of what Leon said because he reminded me of when I took the test in 95, there were 12,000 people and 70 of us graduated. So it was a large pool. I don't know what I did to set myself apart, except I had come out of the Marine Corps and I stayed out of trouble. But what I would say to the people that are watching this, if you are in your community, you go to your local police department and you demand an Explore program. You get your youngsters started early in the process for becoming law enforcement officers. Teach them discipline, teach them how to take care of the bodies physically, keep them physically fit, start to mentally prepare them for the process, okay? Make sure they do good in school. I had a lot of kids turn 18 years old. Like, what am I gonna do now? I can't take the test until I'm 21. Well, go to college, right? You'll at least get 2 years done. If you're motivated, you'll finish in 3. And you'll be 21 and you'll be taking a test. But there's other things you can also do. Go get certified as an EMT. Become a paramedic. There are things you can do within that three-year gap. Stay out of trouble, all right? And to go back to Leon, find some way to be a leader. Become a volunteer firefighter, volunteer paramedic. Do something within that law enforcement career field to make yourself valuable. So when you write out your resume, you're not just going to put high school student, worked at Stop and Shop or Big Y for 3 years, and now you want to be a police officer, right?
Or the peanut store.
Or the peanut store. I was in high school. I was done by 18. You try to blow me up here, right? That's cool. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. But you got to make yourself valuable because there are. Leon's right. The numbers are low. They're only going to hire a certain amount of people because the budget's only going to be so big. They're going to be a specific number of people they want to get into the academies. You have to set yourself apart. And if you do all those things, if you go into the Explore programs in your community, you go into the cadet programs in your community, get to know people and the higher ups in your community. So when they see your name come across their desk, I know that kid, he's doing a lot in this community. I've had the opportunity to sit on 3 oral boards for a local police department in Connecticut on 3 separate occasions. One was just a few months ago, last year, at the end of last year in November, as a matter of fact. You would be surprised, maybe you would, but you would be surprised. I know Charlie and Leon won't be surprised, but as a matter of fact, neither one of you will be surprised, but maybe some of the people that are listening to be surprised of the reasons that these people come in. And one of the first questions you ask them, right, on every board is, why do you want to be a cop? Or why do you want to be a police department in our city? I can't tell you how many times I heard because my uncle was a cop, because my father was a cop, because this, everything but I love people and I love my community and I want to do my part to make a difference in my community. I'm familiar with this organization, with our community. I'm familiar with that organization. Volunteer. Go to your local nonprofits and volunteer. Find some place to volunteer. So you build your references and you walk that straight and narrow path so that you can prove over a period of time that you deserve and you've done the work and you took it seriously enough to become a police officer. So you have to invest in yourself and spend the time in networking within your community, networking within law enforcement people that you know or departments in your community so that they see that you're serious about what you're trying to do. And again, for the parents, I'm big on explore programs. I'm big on youth. That was my thing. Get them when they're 14. Explore program. Every police department in the country can have an explore program. It's overwritten. It's underwritten by the Boy Scouts of America, right? And the state police program, we had our own program. But then I branched off from our program and went to the Boy Scouts of America because I wasn't getting a lot of support, or the support I thought I was going to get from my department. So I did a lot of that stuff on my own, right? But you got to start building up your brand, as they say it now, right, Moss? In the business world, you know, that's what's popping right now. Yep. You got to work on your brand. You got to build yourself up. You got to make yourself valuable, because it's personality. You can't go in with somebody else's personality. You got to go in there with your own personality and with your own experiences. When you sit down and you talk to the people that are interviewing you and they're asking you questions, you can sit there honestly and answer questions about what you've done in your community because you've already done them. The people that go in and have a hard time haven't done anything in their community, which shows they don't care about the community. They just want the job. So I'll wrap it up with that. And again, thanks, D.Moss, Rod, Charlie, and Leon for the opportunity to be here with you guys tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in this conversation. I'm so appreciative. I think it's a necessary conversation. Hopefully, at some point, we can bring you all back. Rob, thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is One-on-One with D.Moss. We'll be back next Thursday, 7 p.m. Tell somebody to tell somebody to tell somebody else. There are necessary conversations that have to happen. With that being said, peace, everybody, and good night.